Okay, this question is from Shane, Pastor Steve. He says, have you heard of Dana Coverstone, first of all? And then, is there any prophecy given to individuals in modern day? I didn't have enough room for all of this, Shane, but then he says, are there any documented cases, and how should Christians react to this whole thing?
Okay, I don't know Dana Coverstone.
Yeah.
You know, Shane, I don't spend a lot of time in Christian culture.
So I'll give you a brief,
Okay.
give you a brief rundown. He's gotten hugely popular on YouTube because he's made some videos about having a vision. I think the first one came around somewhere in August, what I saw. And he comes from a, what's the word for the denomination that I'm looking for? Charismatic background.
Okay.
Not that that's a thing, but that's his background. And he says he had a vision, and then he talks about in these videos descriptions that in around November election time, things are going to happen. And he gives descriptions of his visions. And in those are like end of the world type stuff. And it's, you know, descriptions on different things that this means this and this means that. And then I saw this and I saw that. And then he kind of goes through and describes it. But it's gotten hugely popular. And so people are looking at that going, can there be modern day prophecy?
Okay.
And then I guess you probably should go into what happens if these visions don't come true, or if they do come true. Like, how do you gauge on somebody saying these types of things?
Right. So Shane, whenever you're looking at prophecy, the New Testament says don't despise prophecies. This is in 1 Thessalonians, I think it's it might be chapter 5. Let me make sure I'm in the right place. Yeah, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, it says in verse 20, do not despise prophecies, test all things, hold fast what is good, and abstain from every appearance of evil, appearance of form of evil, or remove yourself from those things. And so, yeah, you know, God can speak to anybody that he wants, and he can give visions to somebody. God hasn't stopped speaking because, you know, we're past the New Testament or something. In the book of Acts, you had a guy named Agabus who was a prophet, and he specifically prophesied about the arrest of Paul. He prophesied in another instance about a famine that was going to come on the city of Jerusalem, actually all across the Middle East, but be particularly something that involved the city of Jerusalem. You have the daughters of Philip who prophesied. And so Agabus was a prophet. It says that the daughters of Philip prophesied. And I understand what it says in the NIV, but it's in an adverbial form. And they prophesied. They weren't prophetesses. And so, or the text doesn't say that they were prophetesses. And so the Bible talks about this. The Bible talks about prophecy in the New Testament. 1 Corinthians chapter 14 talks about the fact that prophecy is given for exhortation, edification, and comfort for men. And so it's in the New Testament. And there are even passages that speak about how prophecy is to be treated. And so, yeah, it's a biblical concept. As far as what you do with a prophet, that is something that's a biblical concept too. And so, as I stated, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, it talks about the fact that you need to judge a prophet. And the way that you judge a prophet is not by whether or not he tithes or whether or not he's a nice guy. The fruit of a prophet is the prophecy that he comes up with. And the reason that I'm telling you that is because many times people will try to minimize the effect of false prophecy on a guy by saying, well, you know, the Bible says that you're to judge him by his fruit. And so the guy's got good fruit. He's a nice guy. He goes to church. He loves the Lord. He tithes and he gives to the poor. And so he's got good fruit. The fruit of a prophet is not tithing. The fruit of the prophet is prophecy.
Yep.
And so when you're judging the fruit of a prophet, you judge the prophecy itself. And so in the book of Deuteronomy, in chapter 13 and verse 1, it says this: if there arises among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and he gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder comes to pass of which he spoke to you, saying, let us go after other gods which you have not known, and let us serve them, you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. You shall walk after the Lord your God and fear him, keep his commandments, obey his voice. You shall serve him and hold fast to him. But that prophet or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he has spoken in order to turn you away from the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you. And he so he ends it up with, so you shall put away the evil from your midst. And so a false prophet was defined as somebody who would turn somebody away from the God of the Bible. And so that's the first test of a prophecy. Is this guy trying to turn me to a God that the Bible does not teach me is the God of the universe? And if that's the case, he's a false prophet. Okay? Then you go over to Deuteronomy chapter 18, and in that passage, there is another section here that talks about what you, again, do with a prophet. In verse 20, it says, the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die. And if you say in your heart, how shall we know the word which the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing does not happen or come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You shall not be afraid of him. And so the second test of a false prophet is if the prophecy does not come to pass. And so it's not if 80% of what he says comes to pass, it's if anything that he says has come from the Lord does not come to pass, the guy's a false prophet. So obviously, you have a high standard for prophets in the Bible, and the standard is 100%. And so the concept behind that is when God is speaking, he is a God who knows the end from the beginning. He never makes a mistake. And so when you're looking at prophecy, those are two of the standards that you judge them by. So, is he turning you to a false god? And if he is, he's a false prophet. Do his prophecies not come to pass? And if they do not, then he is a false prophet. And in ancient Israel, these guys were put to death. So you didn't have a lot of this nonsense going on when people were following the Lord. And so same standard for New Testament times. And again, we need to watch out for this, especially since Jesus said that there were going to be many false prophets in the last days. And so I need to be somebody who's paying attention and not just believing everything that anybody tells me. You have Acts 17:11, where Paul is talking about those at Berea, and he says the Bereans were more noble than those at Thessalonica, for they received the word with all gladness of heart, but then searched the scriptures daily to see if these things were so. Yep. And so when Paul came into town, he commends these guys for not just taking him at his word or just believing everything that he said. He commended them for checking it out and seeing if it went along with what the Bible actually said. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. But the one thing that I want to emphasize from that passage is that they received the word with all gladness of heart. It's the idea that they were open to what God had to say. And so when I look at the whole issue of prophecy, I need to be somebody who's careful. I need to be somebody who judges prophecy, but I also need to be somebody who's open to God speaking to me through that whole thing. And so with this whole thing, we're going to find out. Yeah,
I had a buddy text me, and he's like, what do you think of this guy? What is he saying? And mainly it was having to do with America. Mm-hmm. And it was, like John, like the book of Revelation, it was apocalyptic visions of America. And I'm like, well, we'll find out in November.
Right.
And so I have no idea. Yeah. Now, I'm going to ask you on that, is there a loophole, not a loophole, but I don't know another word to phrase it, but if he's not saying, the Lord told me this is going to happen, if a person's just saying, listen, and this is kind of the flavor I got, he has a bunch of videos, I only watched one, I didn't watch everything that he has. But in the video that I watched, he didn't say, God gave me this, he just says, look, this is the vision that I have. So is there a situation where Satan can give someone a vision and they can go, this is what I saw, but they're not a false prophet because they're not saying that Jesus or God is saying this is going to happen. They're just saying this is what I saw?
Well, they should keep their mouth shut.
Yeah.
If they don't know.
Absolutely.
And so when you're
because you're claiming authority when you
Right,
speak
yeah.
publicly about your vision, and he does do that. He's saying, obviously, making YouTube videos for a reason.
Right, yeah. And so when you go through the Old Testament, the Bible condemns guys who go around and speak about a vision of their own heart.
Okay.
And again, it's talking about false prophets, and especially during the time of the end of Israel. I'm gonna look up a passage out of the book of Jeremiah, for example. Let me see if I can find one real quick.
Yeah. There's so much going on too, as far as biblical prophecy, that I think it's one of Satan's tactics that, when you're talking about Israel, the nation of Israel in 1948 being formed, like there's biblical prophecy from then all the way through the Middle East to stuff's going on now that's being fulfilled daily. You turn on the news, prophecy is being fulfilled daily. Right. One of the tactics of Satan is he throws out false prophets and people that maybe don't know their Bible as well, or like we were talking about interpretation, maybe they're in the allegorical frame. They don't know how to decipher that, and they're like, well, what about this? Well, this guy's saying this. Yeah. And then it just gets this ball of confusion going on.
Right, yeah. Jeremiah 14:14, it says this, "And the Lord said to me, the prophets prophesy lies in my name. I have not sent them, commanded them, nor spoken to them. They prophesy to you a false vision, divination, a worthless thing, and the deceit of their heart." Jeremiah 23:16, he says, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, do not listen to the words of the prophets who prophesy to you. They make you worthless. They speak a vision of their own heart, not from the mouth of the Lord." And so you have guys who go around and they have a vision or they have a dream, and they go out and speak it as if it came from the Lord. And what God calls that is false prophecy. And so again, it's not to be done. That's not something that we want to be involved in. And so if he comes back after November 3rd or whatever and says, I don't know, maybe next year.
Yeah.
That's usually what these guys do. They'll make a solid pronouncement for this year, and when it doesn't come to pass, they'll go, well, it's going to be for next year. And at that point, I would have gone, I would say to them, no, that's not what you said. You said this year. And then I'd pick up a rock and hit him in the head with the rock. That's what they did with prophets in the Old Testament. No, don't do that. I'm just messing around. But false prophecy is to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
And a guy who does this kind of stuff and then backs off on it is a false prophet. And they're not to be listened to. They're not to be encouraged on any kind of level. It's not just a mistake. It's arrogance. So again, when I'm looking at this whole issue, I want to be somebody who's open to something that the Lord may be saying. For all I know, the planet's going to go into World War III on November 4th.
Yep.
And so the Bible talks about these things being on the verge of happening. If this guy is somebody who's actually heard from the Lord, then again, something to be paying attention to. But I get that from my Bible anyway. When I'm reading my Bible, I need to be paying attention to these things. And so I have no doubt that God could speak to people and let them know that this stuff is on the verge of taking place, and be using somebody like that. But then again, like you were saying, Satan can come along and use fruitcakes to cause all kinds of confusion in the life of believers. And so you can see where I'm at on this. I end up being in a situation where, again, for all I know, that's what's happening with this guy. One of the things that I would look at, and again, I haven't seen the guy. I don't know him. And so one of the things that I would be looking at, and this is something you can look at, Shane, is in his whole presentation, who's getting the glory. And so if it's all about him and his name and the fact that he's being promoted, that's one of those things that I have a problem with, because somebody who's representing the Lord is going to be pointing to Jesus, not to themselves. And so that's another thing that I look at. If you go through 2 Peter chapter 3, in that section, actually chapters 2 and 3 in 2 Peter, it talks about false prophets, and talks about the attitudes that these guys have as far as wanting to take disciples after themselves,
Yep.
being into the bucks,
Yep.
Self-promotion, those kinds of things. And those are, again, things that I look at. Okay, so now having said all that, you need to be careful with this, and I would be careful with this guy, and judge everything that he says, and we'll see if it comes to pass. And if it doesn't come to pass, then it's just nonsense. How many times have people said that that the end's coming, in the last 40 years?
A lot.
Yeah. And so in 1988, there were 88 reasons Jesus was coming back in 1988. 1989, the guy came out with another pamphlet, and people bought it.
Didn't it change to 89?
Yes, 89 reasons Jesus is coming back in 1989. Of all things, and Christians bought it. They
so
bought
gullible,
it. Yeah,
man.
and so, it's like that is my classic for this kind of stuff. And every year around September, people are talking about the fact that Jesus is coming back this September, and there's signs in the heavens, and they go to Revelation 12 and that kind of thing, and blood moons and all this kind of stuff. And any time that kind of thing is going on, I am really skeptical because of all the nonsense that people pull. I'll go through and I'll check it out and see what I think about it and that kind of stuff. But the signs that they talk about coming around in September happen every September. Every September. I like astronomy. Those signs happen every September. It's a moon and in Virgo and sun in Virgo and all of that stuff every September. That happens.
So Elizabeth is on Facebook, and
Yeah.
I'm just reading what she says. I have no idea about it. I didn't verify it, and so I don't agree with stuff that I've never checked out. But this is what she says, just real quick. Everything he said, and I'm assuming she's talking about the guy we're talking about, everything he said was going to happen in the month of September didn't happen, and thus far neither did October, and we are halfway through the month.
Okay, so that
According to Elizabeth.
Yeah, Elizabeth, obviously, if you've been paying attention to this stuff, then that's an indication that everything the guy said is bogus. And so walk away.
Yeah.
Just walk away from that. And so again, I don't have anything to go off of except for what you stated, Elizabeth. And if you know that to be true, then if I were you, that's exactly what I would do. Just walk away from it. So,
Okay.
let me talk about the gifts of the Spirit.
Yeah.
The book, The Gift of Tongues is in the Bible. And I know that people get weird with it and do weird things, but it's in the Bible. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, Paul the Apostle talks about the misuse of the gift of tongues in the church at Corinth, and he rebukes them for it. He puts limitations on what is supposed to be happening in their church services. He makes specific points about the fact that everybody in the building shouldn't be speaking in tongues at the same time, because people who come in who are uninformed, and those are people who are believers or people seeking after the Lord, uninformed or unbelievers will think that you're crazy. And so the gifts of the Spirit can be used in ways that are out of line with what the Scripture says, and you can cause real problems. And that's one of the cases that's happened in many charismatic churches with the gifts of the Spirit. The only people who get into that stuff are church people. And when you bring, I have the construction worker test. If I have a guy on who I know who is a construction worker, and I invite him to church, and he is put off by anything except for the teaching of the word and the gospel, the church has a problem. And so again, those gifts are in the Bible. They just need to be used correctly. And when they're used correctly, it's cool. It's just amazing. And so again, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And you guys get that illustration, right? When you wash a baby, the dirt comes off the baby, goes into the bathwater. You want to get rid of the bathwater, but you'd like to keep the baby, right? And it's the same thing with the gifts of the Spirit. Gifts of the Spirit have gotten a bad rap and a bad reputation because of misuse but they're still gifts of the Spirit. And we need to go after the real things and not be put off by the misuses.
You know, what you just said is why I think churches, well, I should say one of the reasons why I think churches should open their stinking doors, because how do you practice the gift of the Spirit? How do you minister to each other? How do you pour out the gifts to other people on YouTube? How do you minister? How do you receive?
Right.
The koinonia cannot be done sitting at home on your couch, but I digress.